Well, thank you for allowing me to come before you today. I'm going to talk, I guess when you get older, you talk about history a little bit. But some of the history I'm going to talk about happened right here in Corpus Christi and in the state of Texas over my career as a union representative. I became a union member in 1967, and the very first week of my training at the corporation where I was hired, 1967. Now remember, this was after the Civil Rights Act had passed. They said, we don't have any Mexicans working here because the Mexicans can't be understood by the public. So I said, wait a minute. You know, I went to Baker Junior High and I went to Ray High School, and we had a lot of Hispanics in my school, and they could be understood by the public. So what happens? I get called into the manager's office for being arbitrary in my first week of training, and said that wasn't acceptable, that I needed to accept what I was trained and be a good little girl and shut up. Well, so I tried. I guess I made it because I was able to retire there much later. But I bring that up to say that corporations in the 60s were not necessarily good citizens. They wanted to operate on their own autonomy, and things like that happen. And some of us of my age know that did happen. Today, I think that's where we are again. Women and minorities are under attack again. We thought we had passed that, and here we go again. So I'm going to talk about just a few things with regard to women and minorities that I went through with my peers and with many of you in the community by our side. And the first one I want to talk about is the Farm Workers March from the Rio Grande Valley to Austin, Texas in 1966. I was not an activist in that march, but I learned about it later and have thought about it over the years, and we worked real hard a few years ago to get a monument to those workers. They were fighting for fair wages, the right to go to the bathroom in private, not in the fields, with everyone around watching. Now, really, should you have to fight for that dignity? So Francis Perkins talked about dignity. We're still talking dignity. They marched from the Rio Grande Valley to Austin, Texas, but they didn't make it to Austin, Texas. They got outside of Austin and were met by the Texas Rangers at the end of rifles and turned back, and many were injured, not shot, but beaten and injured. And some of us, just a few years ago, met them at a rally we had here for that. But that was 1966. So you put in perspective again what we thought had just happened to make Texas and the United States a better place, and it really didn't. There's a marker down, you know, where the Salina kiosk is. There's a marker about 100 feet south of that to these farm workers, 1966 march. You know, our Historical Society for Nueces County, I think now they call it association. They don't like us to say society, but back then it was a Historical Society, agreed to do a monument for that protest for those farm workers who were fighting for dignity, wages, fair wages, to get out of the sun, etc. Unlike many other monuments in Nueces County that were placed, they came back to us and said, okay, we've paid for the monument, we've got it made, but y'all are going to have to raise the money to put it in the cement. And we said, okay, do other folks have to do that? No, but y'all have to. So they said, we need $5,000 to put it on the seawall. I said, okay. So instead of that, my daughter, who was Labor Council president, and I went to see our building trades unions and said, can y'all put this in the ground for us in the cement? Well, the county did not want us to do that. You have to go back to, now this was since I think it was about 2016. You know who the county judge was. They tried to throw all kinds of things at us. No, it has to be this and that. I said, these guys build bridges. They build buildings. They can put something in the cement. So we did get a contractor with IBW and with the plumbers and pipe fitters. We got the specs from the county, the Historical Society, and our monument was placed by union volunteers and a good corporate citizen who gave us the equipment to do it with his equipment. So partnerships are formed. Yeah. So that goes from right after the civil rights thing was passed until just very, very recently. But we have to fight. We have to fight for what others are given. That's just the way it continues to be. My daughter and I worked on with some of the farm workers that remained alive after that 1966 thing. As you can imagine, most of them now are passing away from numerous things, but we've helped build houses in the Rio Grande Valley for those workers that never did get the dignity they needed, but they made changes in the Rio Grande Valley, and now there's porta potties on many, many fields, which is good for the consumer, it's good for the workers, and it's certainly good for their dignity that they can take care of some of their most important issues in private. We have all sorts of things along the way. Ranchers and farmers helped the farm workers along that way, let them camp out on their property, and we made it through that. And many of those workers were with us in, I think it was 2016, but they were certainly with us when we dedicated the monument. But then talking about just, the women things, and most of those melon pickers were women back then. We thought that we had equality. We thought we were getting equality. Some of the things that in my early age as a union official and a union volunteer and a feminist and just a woman in the workplace, our power company back then was not organized, still is not. But if a man and a woman were caught in a dalliance, who do you think had to leave the payroll? It was always the female. We protested at the power company with some of those women. Likewise, if they decided to get married, guess who had to leave the payroll because that company policy was that married folks couldn't work at the same company? The female always had to leave the employee. So we protested with union workers and non-union workers alike to try to bring some fairness into the workplace for men and women. And about that time, we also really, the workplaces began to be not so racially divided. They finally began to hire folks. And it was because, again, we protested with some of you. Francis, I know we protested with you in Austin over a number of things. We protested with your husband, our great judge, back in the 70s for fairness when he was a JP. But we have to fight for what we want. And you know what? Now we have to fight to keep what we thought we had. For example, in the 1971 contract negotiations with my employer, contraception to be paid for by the insurance companies was a big deal. It was a big deal because women finally had the right to contraception, and we thought if men could get medicine for some of their ills, we should get contraception paid by our insurance. So that was our issue. What's happening now? Contraception is back on the table from the Supreme Court and some of that ilk. So here again, we thought we resolved that. Many employers back in the 70s got that as a benefit, added to their insurance. And in collective bargaining, when you get something, you give up something else generally. So it's not that they just gave us that. We bargained for that, and it was part of our package. And now they're trying to make that a big deal and illegal, and they certainly don't want to pay for it, even though we've bargained for it years ago in many, many collective bargaining contracts. Another one that some of you young folks may not realize, if you've had a baby recently and you work for a big company and you were able to go out on a maternity leave and get paid for 6 weeks of disability, that was because the unions in the 60s started fighting pregnancy should be considered as a disability. A man could have a hernia, go out for 6 weeks, get his full pay. He didn't have to pay his premium for his insurance, for him and his family. He didn't have to lose any time accrued toward his pension, perhaps, or vacation, or net credited service for purposes of scheduling or this sort of thing. But women in my employ, and it was the same with the power company here in Corpus Christi, it was the same with most corporate offices. If you were pregnant at 6 months, your employer wanted you to leave the payroll. You would take a leave without pay. You would pick up your insurance premium while you were on disability, or on leave for a baby, not disability yet. And you would lose net credited services in most corporations towards your pension, vacation, scheduling, that sort of thing. Back to the hernia thing. A man could have a hernia, and he wasn't treated the same way. So we started in the 60s with the Machinists Union was one of the big ones, the Teachers Union, my union, Communication Workers of America, and others, fighting pregnancy discrimination. So what happened in our group of Texas CWA workers, we said, we're going to stop telling our boss we're pregnant the day we get the pregnancy result that we are. And they said, but we get so excited and we want to talk about it. No, keep it a secret for at least a few months, so you don't have to leave the payroll at 6 months. So that's kind of what was happening. It didn't always work, but we had some folks who were able to just say, no, I've just gained some weight, till finally it was so obvious that you were pregnant, you had to admit it. But we were able to stall that for a long time, stay on the payroll longer. But the best news is we got pregnancy declared as a disability by the EEOC. If you're, not every company, if your company had a disability policy for a man to have a hernia operation or even a vasectomy, then the women who were pregnant should be considered as a disability. It was a long fight, it was a hard fight, but in 1976, the last union member in Corpus Christi, there was two of us, Becky Moeller and Janie Pena, who had babies in November and December of 1976, and we were the last two in our workplace that did not get paid for our disability, we lost our net credited service because January 1st, 77, it went into effect. So here we go. Now we're fighting pregnancy again, but in a different way, but it's still a woman's issue, and you enlighten men too. I don't mean to make this a total man-bashing day, but you know what? We're being bashed, sort of. So we finally had equality with you men on a disability for pregnancy because unions band together, along with religious communities, along with the faithful that knew that that was not right, that it shouldn't happen. So all this, we've had faith leaders with us, joined at the hip year after year after year on these issues. But I bring it up because it's an issue again today that I thought was resolved and was history. But here we go. Pregnancy is being talked about again. Next is wages and equality. You know, the best solution to wage equality is a collective bargaining agreement, because then you're all paid the same. We've worked at the legislature for many years, along with you and religious leaders, on wage theft and a living wage, and how do we take care of our children. And in Texas, we have a law with regard to equal pay. But this is Texas, of course. So there's some caveats in there that make it impossible to use it. For example, if you are hired today and another man is hired today, and you don't find out for a year and a half that he's making much more than you are for the same exact job, the same exact tasks, well then you slept on your rights, because you should have filed that claim the day that you were hired. But you know what? You didn't know it the day you were hired. You found out around the coffee shop table probably, because in most places they say don't talk about your salary. So you may not find out for a year or more that the gentleman sitting next to you, or even another female sitting next to you, but the gentleman in particular sitting next to you is making more money than you are. We have a law that supports that. We have a law that you can't go say, hey, I'm being treated wrongly, because you've been treated wrongly already for a year. So what? So we need to change the posture of that in the Texas legislature too. But that's the way it is in this great state of Texas. That's the way it will be until we band up and act like it's 1965 again and make some changes for gender, make some changes for the immigrants, make some changes for dignity, make changes in the workplace that treat people like humans. I think it's great to hear about a humanist group. You know, we're all humans after all, but we're not all treated in a humane manner in the workplace, at the grocery store, on the streets. So those are just a few of the issues that I've been through. And then when we talk about the immigration, I'm going to move off of women into the immigrants at this point. When I was in Austin, we heard about a contractor who would go to Mexico, and he would bring back workers from Mexico in his truck. They were particularly gifted in rebar construction. So he would hire these, he would bring them back, he would hire them, work them for 2 weeks, work them long and hard, putting out rebar. And then the night before payday, he would keep them for 2 weeks. The night before payday, he would call ICE. The next morning, there would be a raid at wherever this contractor in Austin was working. He might have 2 or 3 jobs going. There'd be an ICE raid at every one of his locations. And then those workers would scatter into the winds or be deported. And they never got paid. And this is, again, we're talking about current events. This is 2005, 2006, 2008. And he kept getting contracts and got by with that. So, you know, when you steal money, and there's Bible verses with regard to wage theft, not called wage theft, but talks about you don't keep a man's wages overnight. It's against the law. It's against all religious teachings that you steal money from someone who's labored for you. But it happened then. That guy ended up leaving Austin, Texas, but I figure he just probably went to Alabama or Mississippi, and he's probably still doing the same thing there and not getting caught perhaps for a while and getting by with it. So there's so many things that have gone backwards, so many things that have gone backwards. So my thought for today is we need to go back to our roots when we were young workers. Y'all are young workers. Stand up for the workers that you work with. Stand up for yourself. If it's wrong, it's wrong. And let's all try to make this a better place. The main thing I want to do is I want everyone I know who works for a living to come home at night to their families alive. We have too many people who are killed on the job. We have too many people who are maimed on the job. And in Texas in particular, workers' comp is absolutely broken. If you get hurt on the job in Texas, you're probably going to be disabled because you're not going to get the medical help you need. So we've got to band together on things like that. Basic things that we think we should have in our state that have gone awry, have gone backwards. And I'm ashamed that on my watch, some of these things have happened. But you know what? The batteries in my magic wand went dead, and some things I just could not fix. We could advocate for it. We could all group together and advocate for positive change, but this is not a good state of the union in Texas today. And hopefully it will be, but the main thing is we're organizing Starbucks in Austin. We're organizing Starbucks in Dallas. The Starbucks here, recently I went in, and you know, the little thing was we're going to say union yes on our name instead of saying my name is Becky. Well, they won't do that anymore at this particular Starbucks. No, my boss won't let me say that. Instead, they kind of jiggle the cup and hope that you're looking at them and you'll come get your coffee. But we have workers, 71% of the American public in this time supports union organizing because they know that we've gone backwards in so many things. Amazon is opening a facility here. We hope that we'll have an Amazon drive here soon and represent those workers. And when you talk about safety and health, just back to the having to use the fields as a melon picker back in the 60s, it's not much different than being an Amazon driver or a UPS driver and making sure you have a bucket of some kind a bottle of some kind in your car. That must change. Dignity, safety, and money. That's what we need. Thank you very much.